This evening, we're on the road to Emmaus in Luke 24. Let's open in prayer. God, we ask that you would speak to us tonight, that you would reveal yourself to us like you did to those two disciples 2,000 years ago. And we just ask for that fire, that burning inside of us of your Holy Spirit to be reignited in all of us. Let us know you, that you're close and you're with us now. In your name we pray. Amen. All right. Luke 24, verse 13. Now that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. And as they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them. But they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" They stood still, and their faces were downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" "What things?" he asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it is the third day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but they didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see Jesus." He said to them, "How foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he were going farther. But they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening. The day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, he gave thanks, he broke it, and he began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. And they asked each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?" They got up and they returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 and those with them assembled together and saying, "It is true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon." Then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread. So, starting off, the lion's share of the Bible study tonight is going to be looking at what is Emmaus, or where was Emmaus? Can we even know? This village that's mentioned here. And so that will be the first thing that we look at here. And this is a map here from Carta in Jerusalem. And there are 4 places that we're going to look at. And so that first place is the circle in red, Emmaus Nicopolis. And this is the big one, the traditional one that is assumed to be Emmaus, Nicopolis. And it's located, if you know where the Ayalon Canada Park is here in Israel, it's located just past Latrun on the north side of Highway 1. And it has a very strategic position on an ancient road going from the coast up to Jerusalem. It has a number of springs of water, which were connected to aqueducts and cisterns, and that will be an important detail as we get further along. I'll explain that. So there was a lot of water sources there. It's mentioned in the book of Maccabees during the wars that were going on between the Greeks and the Hasmoneans. This place, and it was called Emmaus. Even other rabbinic writings talk about it. Josephus, the Jewish historian of the 1st century, called Emmaus, a city, which is normally reserved for a large and well-organized population center. And again, it's mentioned in rabbinic writings. So after the time of Jesus, in the time of the early church, the Byzantine church, you're looking at the 3rd century AD. Emmaus here gets a new name, Nicopolis, and the early church fathers there, Eusebius, Jerome, Origen, Sozomen, all connect this city to the Emmaus of Luke that we're talking about tonight. And the name that was kept in Arabic into the modern history, Emmaus, you hear the Emmaus there, and there have been excavations there, and there's current remains there of a Crusader church from the 12th century, which is on top of a 5th century Byzantine church. And this is that Crusader church at Nicopolis. But the problem with Nicopolis is how far away it is from Jerusalem. It's a long ways away. It's 160 stadia. And according to most of our text, it's 60. Most of our main text of the Gospels have 60 stadia, which is what we read tonight back in Luke 24:13. It says they're going to a village called Emmaus, about 60 stadia away from Jerusalem. So this Nicopolis, again, it's circled here in red, is far outside of that blue half circle that marks a circumference of 60 stadia from Jerusalem. This is from Biblical Archaeology Review. So it's far, far away. And so there's been different ways to try to explain why that would be. But let's just take it on face level that it does not add up with the majority view of textual evidence. So the second one we're going to look at for Emmaus is the one from Abu Ghosh. And I lived in Abu Ghosh some years ago, and it was literally a hop, skip, and a jump from my house. And Abu Ghosh is today it's a Muslim village just outside of Jerusalem, and it got its character around 200 to 300 years ago, and they claim descendancy from the Caucasus Mountains, kind of in the area of Russia. But in its ancient history, in the Bible, it's called Kiryat Yarim. And this we know from 1 Samuel 7 is where the Ark of the Covenant dwelt for 20 years before it came into Jerusalem to be a part of David's intention to build the temple, which ended up being Solomon. So this area goes way back into the biblical time period. And the Crusaders in the 12th century built a church here, and they called this Emmaus of Luke 24. And there is a spring located there in the crypt of the church. So there's a water source. So we can keep that in mind. This is the church there in Abu Ghosh. And it essentially is a Crusader time period church. And it fits the description or the length from Jerusalem. The distance from Jerusalem is correct. It's about 60 stadia. You see it here. It's right on that blue half circle, Abu Ghosh. Okay, so the third Emmaus is one just to the north of Abu Ghosh, and it's called El Kubiye, El Kubibe, and it was on a Roman road, but like the one in Abu Ghosh, it's also a Crusader church. It was something that was discovered in the 11th century, and the church is built in the 13th century. Though they have got remains there from Roman time period, it's kind of a later tradition. There's no early church tradition connecting to either El Kubibe or the one in Abu Ghosh, Castellum. So this is that church in El Kubibe. And you see on the left, there's Jesus between the two disciples where they're eating together. So the only way to get to this church is you have to enter into the West Bank. So there's not a direct road. It's kind of, you have to drive around and about to get there. So it's not so easy to go there. And also it's the right distance from Jerusalem. And this is why during the Crusader time period, probably was gaining more of a popular tradition because of its distance. And you see it here sitting right on that half circle of 60 stadia from Jerusalem. So we've looked at 3 potential candidates for Emmaus. Nicopolis, there to the left, Kubibe, there circled in red, and then Abu Ghosh is just below it. Those are 3 candidates. There's actually quite a few candidates, but we're only going to look at 4 tonight. And this is the 4th, which is Cologne, there in Motza. And if you want to read a excellent article by David Bibbin at the Jerusalem Perspective, he wrote an article 5, 6, 7 years ago, A Farewell to the Emmaus Road. Been there a few times, and once with David, actually. Took some pictures there for him. Emmaus, Cologne, which is located right next to a moshava called Motza here in the modern state of Israel. And there are springs of water there that kind of flow into the valley. And it goes back into the biblical time period. It was a biblical settlement. It was a part of Benjamin's inheritance. And recently, in the last decade or so, archaeologists have even found an Israelite cultic building at Tel Motza. It's about 11 years ago. So you see not just Jews living there of the time of Jesus, but even going back before to the Israelite time period. And its name, Colonia, is probably coming from the word colony, because according to Josephus, there in the quote, the second dot, he says there, about the same time, Caesar sent instructions to Bassus and Laberius Maximus, the procurator, to farm out all Jewish territory. For he founded no city there, reserving the country as his private property, except that he did assign to 800 veterans discharged from the army a place for habitation called Emmaus, about 30 stadia from Jerusalem. And so this colony was a Roman soldier colony, and they have found archaeological remains from that colony, a Roman tombstone, I think a bathhouse, and some other things of significance. And this was a place that would have been after the war, the Jewish war, where the veterans of the Roman army probably would have gone and retired to. And so Colonia is where this name kind of carries on past the Roman period, because after the Muslim conquest, the name sticks and it's called Colonia. So just a derivative there. Now, it's located at Motza, and the word Motza in Hebrew is coming from the root of going out, exiting, something coming forth, issuing forth. And like in Genesis 1, when it talks about God brings forth seed from the earth, he brings it forth, brings it out. And Isaiah 41:18, the word motza is even specifically a spring of water, because it's talking about water that's being brought forth out of the earth. It's a motza. And so you see in Isaiah 41:18, I will make rivers flow on barren heights and springs within the valleys. I will turn the desert into pools of water and the parched ground into springs. And so the Hebrew there for springs is motzei maim. And so it's a parallelism with pools of water and springs of water that's issuing forth. David Biven, in his article at Jerusalem Perspective, suggests that perhaps Josephus, when he's transliterating Hamotza, the spring, talking about that settlement there, he's transliterating Hamotza as Emmaus, which you have the spring, a transliteration of the Hebrew into Greek. And Luke's Emmaus, or in the Greek Emmaus, could be understood as an independent transliteration of Hamotza. So Emmaus perhaps is coming from the word for spring and coming from the Hebrew. And so why would, now remember, we were saying the first place we looked at for Emmaus was Nicopolis, and it was also called Emmaus. So this word, or this name for a city or town, was common because we're talking about springs. You think about towns today that are called hot springs this, or cold springs that, or Colorado Springs. You can High Springs. There's all kinds of city or town names with the word springs in it. So too, Motza, Emmaus would have been a common name for a place. And David Biven points out that in the Mishnah, that Motza, this place, which is 30 stadia from Jerusalem, was where during Sukkot they would go down and gather the willow branches for the holiday, the festival, and to bring them up to the temple. So it was in Motza that they would gather willow branches, because they would grow down near water, and for some reason this was the place they did it. And then later in the Talmud, Rabbi Tanhuma attributes this Motza as Colonia. So as you remember, Colonia is our word that we have for colony, connected to the Roman soldiers being there. First off, could this be the Emmaus of Luke 24, Colonia? It has the springs, so we're talking about water coming forth. It's just over 30 stadia from Jerusalem. As we know from Luke 24, it says Emmaus is 60 stadia from Jerusalem. So could it be that the writer there of Luke is talking about a round trip from Jerusalem? This Emmaus would be 60 stadia if you went there and back, because that's exactly what the disciples did that day. They walked to Emmaus and then they walked back. And there's a Roman road that went through Motza, through this colonia from Jerusalem. And this is part of that road that David Bivens collected many photos over the years. Unfortunately, it's been destroyed by Israeli government infrastructure work. It's right next to a massive burial mountain, and there's been a lot of expansion there over the last decades, and it's caused a lot of runoff and destruction to that road. But here you can see the curbing stones of that road 30 years ago. And so this is Motza right here, red circle. It's 30 stadia from Jerusalem. So it's like halfway with in comparison to Abu Ghosh or Kubibe. Okay, so I want to just look at, because the Abu Ghosh and Kubibe are crusader, there's not a lot of long tradition that connects them to Emmaus. It's only approximately 1,000 years old or less. Whereas Nicopolis and Motza are both mentioned as Emmaus in the ancient sources. So I want to just point out here why factors against Nicopolis being Emmaus. First off, the distance is much greater than what Luke 24 says. It's quite long. If the disciples had walked all the way there in one day, and then it says they walked back when Jesus disappeared from them, it would have been close to 40 miles round trip that day. So that's a massive, even for ancient standards, you probably don't want to walk that far unless you're in a war and you're horse marched. And so that's number 2 right there. Number 3, it says in the text that Emmaus was well known. It was a city at the time of Jesus and after. And so Luke would not need to identify it by the distance, because people would know, oh, Emmaus, Nicopolis is the name it gets later on. But Emmaus was quite a old settlement there, here on the far left of Nicopolis. So these are kind of the negative factors about identifying Nicopolis with Emmaus from Luke 24. And factors that could support Colonia, which is Motza, being Emmaus. Luke 24 does not call it a city. It calls it a village. Josephus calls Colonia a place. So it's like agriculture fields. It's not developed. So that would fit better with Luke 24:13, calling it a small place, a village. Another thing is David Biven and actually a few of us have walked it from Jerusalem. It's just over an hour and a half to walk to Colonia from the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And so it would have been a reasonable round trip, 60 stadia, to do in a day. And then it has this long history from Josephus with later rabbinic writings, the Arab residents in more modern times, that it was a colony. And so it dates it back to the time of the Romans. And if the transliteration makes sense, Emmaus could represent Motza, talking about the springs that came out of there. Okay, well, let's keep going here. That's just to kind of start people thinking about some historical geography there. As the two of them are walking and they're talking and they're debating about things that have been happening, Jesus walks up. And it says in verse 16, they are kept from recognizing him. And so it appears it's not that he's disguising himself, but there's something that's preventing their eyes and their brains supernatural to know that that is Jesus. And we have a similar account in Mark 16 about the resurrection and this story here, where Mark 16 verse 9 talks about Jesus rising on the first day of the week, and first to Mary Magdalene, and then in verse 12 it says Jesus appeared in a different form to two of them while they were walking in the country. And so this is obviously an allusion to Luke's Emmaus account. And it started getting me to think about the whole idea of not recognizing people, not recognizing maybe strangers. And we all know the verse in Hebrews 13 where it says, do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. And you had this similar story in actually all four of these examples of Abraham and Sarah, Lot, Manoah, the father of Samson, and Gideon. All of them entertained angels, and they provided hospitality to some extent, but they did not recognize who they were actually dealing with, or it's ambivalent. And I'm going to come back to this in a little bit. So as they're going along, Jesus asked them, what are the two of you talking about? And it says their faces are downcast. They're gloomy. And so they're not in a good mood. And one of them was named Cleopas. Cleopas, who is Cleopas? His name does not appear anywhere in the New Testament. There is a Clopas, which is mentioned in John. Clopas was the husband of a Mary. And so I'll just give, no one knows for sure, but coming back to Eusebius, the church historian from the 4th century, when he does his research about things in the Bible, he'll often quote from other chroniclers or scholars that came before him. So Eusebius is writing in the 300s, and he's quoting from Hegesippus, who's writing around 180 approximately, who apparently had interviewed the grandsons of Jude the apostle. And he had learned that Clopas was the brother of Joseph, husband of Mary. And so there's some that think Clopas was another name for Cleopas. And so that could have been the brother of Joseph, Jesus' father, stepfather. And so who knows? Don't know for sure. And so Cleopas asked, are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days? And that's just such an ironic statement, because of all the people who would know what's happened in Jerusalem in the last days, it would be Jesus, because it happened to him. And Jesus asks, well, what things? Playing along. And so Cleopas and his fellow disciple reply, the things about Jesus of Nazareth. He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. And the term prophet is quite well used throughout Scripture. And you'll remember when Jesus was in Nazareth at the synagogue, and he's reading from Isaiah and giving some interpretation. The people say, "Isn't this Joseph's son?" And then Jesus says at the end there, he says, "Truly I tell you, no prophet is accepted in his hometown." And so there's already here an implication about him being a prophet, someone who's speaking the word of God, because that's what a prophet is, someone who is a mouthpiece for God. Acts 3, Peter says, "Now, fellow Israelites, I know that you acted in ignorance, as did your leaders, but this is how God fulfilled what he had foretold through all the prophets, saying that his Messiah would suffer. For Moses said, 'The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your own people. You must listen to everything he tells you, and anyone who does not listen to him will be completely cut off from their people.'" So the term prophet here is not just a mouthpiece of God, just not any old prophet. This Jesus is being connected to the prophet like Moses. This is a very special prophet, the one who is like a second Moses and God has some salvific plan in store with him. And that is salvation comes through him. And the person who does not listen or obey him is cut off from the people. And so back in our road to Emmaus, what's happened? Jesus of Nazareth, he's this prophet, powerful in word and deed. And the chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death. They crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And so the chief priest, we've talked about the aristocracy of the high priest in Jerusalem, and the rulers, they're in an alliance together with Herod Antipas, with the Roman governors, and they are being connected here in Luke 24 to the powers that be. But we all know the Romans under Pilate, the governor Pilate, was the one who actually crucified Jesus. But back in Luke 23, when he's on trial with Pilate, it says in Luke 23 that Pilate called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people, and he said to them, "You brought me this man as one who was inciting the people to rebellion." And so, just like we've read here in Luke 24:20, the chief priests and rulers handed him over. Who did they hand him over to? They handed him over to Pilate, to the Romans, because they are accusing him of inciting rebellion. And so back on the road to Emmaus, the two disciples are continuing to discuss Jesus, this prophet who was killed. That verse 21, we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And this is a theme that flows throughout the Gospel of Luke and the Gospels about Jesus as a redeemer. But he's a complicated redeemer, all the way back at his birth, when he's brought to the temple for his blessing. Simeon, the old guy, he makes a prophecy there to Mary that this child is destined to cause the falling and rising of many in Israel, and to be a sign that will be spoken against, so that the thoughts of many hearts will be revealed, and a sword will pierce your own soul too. And then a few verses later, the prophetess Anna, who's also around the temple, worshiping day and night, fasting and praying, when she sees Jesus, she says this about him. She gave thanks to God, and then she went and spoke about the child to all who were looking forward to the redemption of Jerusalem. In Matthew 1:21, the name Jesus is given to him because he will save his people from their sins. So again, this redemption motif. And in Zechariah's song in Luke 1, when talking about his son John to be born, he says in Luke 1:68 that the God of Israel has come to his people and redeemed them. He has raised up a horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David. And he is going to give salvation from our enemies, from the hand of all those who hate us. And then in verse 76, and you, my child, talking to John, you will be called a prophet, and you will go before the Lord, preparing the way. And what is John doing? He's giving his people the knowledge of salvation through the forgiveness of their sins. And so obviously this connects back to Matthew 1:21, who the forgiveness of sins is going to come through this name, Jesus, who will save his people from their sins. And when Jesus was getting ready to ascend to heaven in Jerusalem in Acts 1, he spent 40 days with his disciples, teaching them. And in verse 6, they were around him and they asked him, Lord, are you at this time going to restore the kingdom to Israel? And so again, I find this thread of redemption that is flowing through the whole calling and ministry of Jesus. And his disciples are asking, so where is this redemption? Is it something we're going to see, something, I guess, maybe eschatological? It's going to happen right now, the final judgment. And that is not the case, because Jesus instead leaves them with the Holy Spirit. And so the two disciples, they're processing all of this. Who was Jesus? And he kind of let us down because we thought he was going to redeem Israel. And on top of it, it's been the third day since he died. And of course, we all know in the Galilee, Jesus told his disciples, the Son of Man is going to suffer many things, be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, teachers of the law. He must be killed, and on the third day be raised to life. So obviously, they're referring back to this teaching of Jesus that on the third day, he was going to resurrect. And so even at the tomb, when the angels tell the women, why are you looking for the living among the dead? Don't you remember while he was in the Galilee, he told you he was going to be crucified and on the third day raised again. And then they remembered his words. So the two disciples on the road to Emmaus continue to tell Jesus about, and there were some of our women that amazed us because they went to look for his tomb early in the morning, but they didn't find his body. And they came and told us they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. In Luke 24, verse 10 talks about those women being Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary, the mother of James, and some others. And then the two disciples on the road to Emmaus told Jesus, and some of our companions went to the tomb and they found it just as the women had said. And obviously, this is referring back to Peter there in Luke 24, verse 12. But nobody has seen Jesus in the account of Luke. This, in fact, is going to be the first appearance of Jesus in the Gospel of Luke. And so Jesus says to these two guys, how foolish you are and slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. The word there in Greek for scriptures is writings. And next Bible study, we're going to look at this phrase, Moses, the prophets, and the writings. And we're going to dig in to the background about a suffering Messiah? And was there such an expectation at the time, or was this something that completely shocked Jewish expectations? But we won't linger on this tonight. Continuing, they're approaching the village, Emmaus, and they urge Jesus to come inside and stay with them. So he does. In verse 30, when he was at the table with them, he took bread, he gave thanks, he broke it, and he began to give it to them. And then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. And they asked each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?" And so this turn of events here, he took bread, he gave thanks, he broke it, and he gave it to them. Should immediately make you think about the Last Supper, the Passover, the last Passover that Jesus had with his disciples, because in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that all talk about this final meal together, and in Paul in 1 Corinthians 11, talks about there was bread, and it was broken, and then it was passed out, it was given. And so this meal in Emmaus should invoke memories from, I guess it would be 3-4 days prior. And so already right there, that would, even though these two disciples are not part of the 12, you would still maybe have, as you're reading this, us disciples today and later on, you're getting images of this Last Supper and the last Passover. And it's not just bread that's being broken, it would be matza that's being broken. And in Passover, matza is known as the bread of affliction. In the Magid portion of the Seder, it begins with uncovering and lifting of the matza on the Seder table, and then reciting the halach anya, which is the bread of affliction in the Aramaic. And it's the portion is, this is the bread of affliction. So lifting up, uncovering and lifting up the matzah, this unleavened bread. You would say, this is the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. All those who are hungry, let them enter and eat. All who are in need, let them come celebrate the Passover. Now we are here next year in the land of Israel. This year we are enslaved. Next year we will be free. And so Passover is this feast of redemption, about Israel being redeemed from its enemies. And in this case, it was the Egyptians, because they had been slaves for over 400 years. And the meal reminds them of what they've come out of, the suffering of slavery and the redemption that came through the Lord's servant Moses leading them out of Egypt. And this bread of affliction passage from the Passover Seder, it's quoting from Deuteronomy 16. And I'm going to read just a few verses to get the context here. Deuteronomy 16 says, "Observe the month of Aviv and celebrate the Passover of the Lord your God, because in the month of Aviv, he brought you out of Egypt by night. Sacrifice as the Passover to the Lord your God an animal from your flock or herd at the place the Lord will choose as a dwelling for his name. Do not eat it with bread made with yeast, but for 7 days eat unleavened bread, matzot, there in the Hebrew, or also known as the bread of affliction, lechem oni, because you left Egypt in haste, so that all the days of your life you may remember the time of your departure from Egypt. Okay. And so I want to kind of here head to the end by reading from this story of Gideon, which is well known, very famous. Gideon from the smallest tribe who the Lord is coming to bring redemption for Israel from their enemies, which at that time was the Midianites. So in Judges 6, the angel of the Lord came down and sat under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abuzirite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." "Pardon me, my lord," Gideon replied, "but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?'" So here's an allusion to Passover, being brought out of the slavery of Egypt. And then Gideon continues, "But now the Lord has abandoned us. He's given us into the hand of Midian, their enemy." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" And Gideon says again, "Pardon me, my Lord, but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I'm the least in my family." The Lord answered, "I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive." Gideon replied, "If now I have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that it is really you talking to me. Please do not go away until I come back and bring my offering and set it before you." And the Lord said, "I will wait until you return." So Gideon went inside, he prepared a young goat, and from an ephah of flour, he made bread without yeast, matzot. Putting the meat in a basket and its broth in a pot, he brought them out and he offered them to him under the oak. And the angel of God said to him, "Take the meat and the unleavened bread, matzot, place them on this rock and pour out the broth." And Gideon did so. Then the angel of the Lord touched the meat and the unleavened bread, matzot, with the tip of the staff that was in his hand. Fire flared from the rock, consuming the meat and the bread, and the angel of the Lord disappeared. When Gideon realized that it was the angel of the Lord, he exclaimed, "Alas, sovereign Lord, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." And so our story tonight in Emmaus ends with the two disciples sitting with Jesus at the table. And when Jesus takes the bread and gives thanks and breaks it, their eyes are opened and they recognize him. And then he disappears from their sight. And they asked each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?" They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem, and there they found the 11 and those with them assembled together and saying, "It's true, the Lord is risen. He's appeared to Simon." And then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread. And so, as you know, for Passover, you eat unleavened bread for 7 days. And so this is the third or fourth day of Passover when they're in Emmaus. So they're going to be eating matzot. They're going to be breaking matzot at their meal as observant Jews in the land. And so conclusion-wise, it's uncertain where Emmaus is. There's good guesses, and I think David Bivens' Colonia could be a good one for the reasons that I gave earlier there at Motza. But it is also interesting to consider that because it's uncertain, it kind of plays in to the whole story of Emmaus, that it's not some famous city. It's off the beaten path village where two despondent disciples are sadly stumbling down the road towards. And I like the way that Daryl Bach here puts it, that the vagueness of the details about Emmaus are what make the story more authentic. Because if you were trying to make something up to tell a story, you wouldn't make up a vague village with a disciple named Cleopas, which most people don't even know who that is. And so it's because it's got these details that are out of the ordinary, Emmaus and Cleopas, that it sticks and holds in the early church's memory. And then the second thing I would say is this breaking the matzot here at the meal, this bread of affliction. I think there's something to why the disciples recognized Jesus at that moment, because of who he was and his calling, because he was a man of affliction, just like that bread of affliction. He had suffered on the cross unjustly, but that is where the redemption for Israel was going to come from, in a greater plan. And I find this story quite ironic. There's multiple ironic moments on the road to Emmaus, but I think that's the great irony of all, is that God is with us, just like he told Midian, just like he told Moses and all the other heroes in scripture. When Jesus is there with the two disciples, they don't know that he's there, and they assume that he's not there. And that's the irony, because he was with them that whole time. And so it's a story of encouragement to not assume the worst, but to understand that truly God is there and he has a plan of salvation that's being worked out, even though it might be slow.